still expensive, but everything's expensive at the beginning. Do you know what a car cost in 1900? It cost $10,000 in $1,900. You imagine what it would cost? But when you had mass production, etc., it went down. Years ago, Barry Commoner, the great environmentalist, presented a detailed plan to the Pentagon and said, look, if you buy solar, you're going to create economies of scale in a civilian marketplace. And why should they buy solar? Well, the Navy started buying solar photovoltaics in remote locations, not just for environmental reasons, but for economic reasons. You don't have to refuel. And if the Pentagon did that, given the money it spends, it could have accelerated the solar age. So I always answer questions like yours, but your earnest questions is, why bother when we have these other alternatives? Just think of the evacuation plant. What kind of energy requires a massive, detailed evacuation plant than nuclear power? I suppose a liquefied natural gas tanker coming into a port. But it was the Atomic Energy Commission itself, the big promoter of nuclear power, in 1957, said a Class 9 meltdown in a 1,000-megawatt nuclear plant would contaminate an area the size of Pennsylvania. Do we want to take the chance like that? Look at Chernobyl. You got villages around Chernobyl completely evacuated, you know, with the doors swinging in the wind and empty houses. I just urge you to get a hold of Amory Lovin's studies on this. He's a physicist. He doesn't even talk about the danger of nuclear power. He just rips it apart on an economic basis. He's a consultant to utility companies, so he doesn't read Karl Marx on his lunch break. Let's put it that way. Well, we do have to go on to your favorite neighbor state, Nebraska, and I hope that those of you who are here who really are serious about helping us get out the vote, we'll have a meeting here. Yes, thank you again. Remember, votenator.org. Just spread the website to your friends. The voter will not vote for the worst. And so the least worst voter is ignored, has no bargaining power. And so both parties are being pulled 24/7 by the corporate interest, and the least worst voter, so freaked out with the possibility of another 4 years, say, Republican, makes no demands on Obama or John Kerry or Al Gore, the kind of demands that would get them more votes. The anti-war movement in 2004 took off. No rallies, no marches. They broke the back of the anti-war momentum coming out of 2003 because they couldn't stand another 4 years of Bush, quite properly, and they didn't want to embarrass Kerry. Why? Because Kerry wanted more soldiers in Iraq. He wanted to out-macho, better manage the war, he'd put it. And you remember in the first debate, he looked at Bush and he said, "We wouldn't have pulled out of Fallujah." And the Wall Street Journal had a lead editorial saying, "Bravo, John Kerry, you out-hawked Bush." The Wall Street Journal has never seen a war abroad it doesn't like, praising John Kerry. Well, a few weeks later, Bush went into Fallujah and blew it apart. And he didn't have to worry about the Democratic opposition, did he? Now, if the labor groups were pulling Kerry to take a stand on living wage, wouldn't that get him more votes? If the environmental groups were pulling Kerry to take a stand for renewable energy and no nuclear power, I think that would have gotten him more votes. Or public transit, or affordable housing, or full Medicare for all. By not making Kerry better, they allowed Kerry to fuzz the differences with Bush, to engage in protective imitation. And the American people, if they want to vote for a militarist, they'll vote for the real thing, George W. Bush, not an ersatz militarist like John Kerry reflected. I was in Florida in 2004, and a group had qualified an initiative for a $1 increase in the minimum wage from 5.25 to 6.25. It was opposed by Jeb Bush, Republican Party, and the fast food industry. It had no TV ads. This community group just put it on the ballot. No TV ads, no promotion. And I met some Kerry people, and I said, I had given my whole proposal to Kerry in a meeting. I knew him when he was a veteran coming back from Vietnam. I gave him the whole thing in May, because we have no proprietary interest in our proposals. We just want them adopted. And I said to the Kerry people, Senator Kerry's coming down here almost every week. It's a swing state. Why isn't he supporting this $1 increase big time and asking, for inflation adjusted? And I said, well, he does want a minimum wage. But I says he's not campaigning openly for it. Well, you know what it won by? Up against Jeb Bush, the fast food ads, McDonald's, 72%. He couldn't even support something that had that kind of support. That's what happens if you're a least worst voter and you're a labor group or a minority group or a prison reform group or want to change the drug laws, and you give these Democrats a free ride. They're never going to look back on you because they know they've got your vote. The war on drugs is a monstrosity. It's one of the biggest blowback policies in American domestic history. We are filling our jails with nonviolent drug offenders. You get caught with a little marijuana or heroin, and you can go 1, 2, 4, 5 years in jail. We've corrupted our politics. Our law enforcement machinery is being drained by it. Our courts are being clogged, so we can't even have civil suits and trial by jury under the tort law because it's all, the federal courts are full of these drug cases, for example. So our proposal, which is probably why we don't get any national TV, is a national amnesty for all nonviolent drug offenders, empty out the cells, because we do not send nicotine addicts to jail. We do not send alcoholics to jail. And alcohol and tobacco take 500,000 lives a year, far, 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 far more than hard drugs. That we'd empty out the cells, clean them up, and with a massive corporate prosecution program against corporate crooks, convict them and put them in those cells. And then you'll get prison reform. So you get a triple header. And in so doing, the fines, the criminal corporate fines, can pay for the rehabilitation. You know how far we've gone downhill in this area? Richard Nixon proposed to Congress a major piece of legislation in the 1970s emphasizing rehabilitation, not imprisonment, for people with drug addictions. No president has dared do that since. You might ask yourself why. No presidential debates have discussed it other than, we want more law enforcement. Well, you got the big drug dealers. That's a law enforcement problem. But a drug addiction problem is a crime? Shame on us. Let me end on this note, and then I want to introduce someone, then we can have a discussion. Corporations should never be given constitutional rights. They are a legal entity. They are not human beings. They don't vote. They don't have children. They don't die in Iraq. They make profit in Iraq. Halliburton, Blackwater. Somehow, a Supreme Court decision, 1886, without even including it in its opinion, in its headnotes, by a scribe who was a railroad attorney, got the Supreme Court on record as giving that corporation the constitutional rights of a person. So corporations are now considered persons. So this non-human entity with all kinds of privileges and immunities and the ability to do things you will never be able to do, like being in 1,000 places at once, creating endless children called subsidiaries, endless parents called holding companies, enormous concentration of political, technological, and economic power, has the same constitutional rights as you and I. Not good. You cannot have equal justice under the law when you have Exxon or General Motors have all the constitutional powers you have and the privileges and immunities that they have. So we have taken a stand to strip corporations of their personhood and declare that the only people who should have constitutional rights in our country are human beings. Well, that's a radical move, huh? Only people are human beings. That would mean, as Businessweek magazine itself pointed out in an editorial, to its credit, in 2000, that corporations would not be able to engage in politics, they would not be able to engage in lobbying, they would not be able to engage in elections. They just used the word politics. That means that if anybody wants to engage in politics, election, lobbying, they have to be human beings to level the playing field a little more. And then we would not exaggerate the opposition to a great society. Very often in our frustration about not being able to change things and being up against concentrated power and opposition, political, corporate, whatever, we tend to exaggerate what is needed in citizen power to overcome that opposition. And so let's bring it down to scale. The Congress is the most powerful branch of the three branches under our Constitution. It's also the branch that can be most quickly changed. It's made up of 535 men and women who put their shoes on every day like you and I do. 1,500 corporations, give or take, get their way with a majority of those 535 men and women. They don't have a single vote, these corporations. We're the ones who have the vote. And back in our congressional districts, we're 630,000 people in each congressional district. So what's our excuse? These people in Congress, to stay in Congress, which most of them want to do, have to have votes. So if in each congressional district, which has universities and colleges, and every congressional district has at least one college, 2,000 people got together with an agenda. Let's start with 10 major redirections that are long overdue, like full Medicare for all, living wage, cracking down on corporate crime, renewable energy, etc. Basically organized a Congress watchdog group. Let's call it a Citizens Congress. And let's say they agreed before they even organized on a platform, so they didn't have to disagree and fight each other. 10 major directions. Long overdue, Western Europe has many of them, etc. No big deal. And they would give 200 hours a year, volunteer time each, and they would contribute $200 to open 3 offices with 3 full-time people to provide the continuity and pressuring Congress to change. If that existed in every congressional district, that's about 1 million people, 20, 30, 40 million bucks, what the head of Lehman Brothers makes in 6 months or whatever. Those changes would go through in 18 months. That's how fast members of Congress will become attentive and respect that power. Because you could show them that you're there, you're not going to go away, you know every move they make in Congress, you can disseminate throughout the whole district, and you are supported by a majority of people in your district. Now, I say that thinking about that will reduce the exaggeration of what it takes to begin changing our country, even if the corporations have the power. They don't have the votes. And I also say that the intensity that is required for Congress watchdog groups is nothing compared to what the American people have to grapple with every day. They are doing far more difficult things every day than setting up these Congress watchdog groups. They're raising children. You want to try that one? In terms of difficulty, they're rescuing children from the streets. They're taking care of an ailing parent or grandparent. They've got a job and a half or 2 jobs and are paying $500 a month for daycare in order to make ends meet, and they still can't make ends meet in terms of the necessities of life. They're worried if they get sick that they can't pay for treatment. All of that is much more difficult to deal with than to establish these Congress watchdog groups that will alleviate these kinds of pressures, that will develop a tranquility, reduce the anxiety, establish a forward look so people can have more time and enabling conditions to fulfill their life's possibilities. We're doing this campaign because we want to bring in young people into clean politics, into organizational skills, into running for office. It's your future. You've got 15,000 days and a little over 2,000 weeks before you turn 65. And if you think last week went quickly, you haven't seen anything yet. And your 1920s are your most creative decade. You'll have more judgment, wisdom, and experience later on. You're not likely to break paradigms and plow new ground any better than you're going to do in your 20s. That is, if you get over personal hang-ups that you should have taken care of in your teenage years. And I'm not going to elaborate that one. One of these young people is Matt Zawisky from a blue-collar family in Buffalo, which is very seriously deindustrialized. And he's been with us for 7 years as a full-time organizer, the most critical skill in social justice movements, on-the-field organizer, handling all kinds of things, technical, personal, budget-wise, logistics, and so on. Every movement has had organizers, social justice organizers, the abolition movement, the labor movement, the women's movement, the right to vote, you name it. And he's going to share some thoughts with you and see how you can help us even more than you have already. And I hope many of you will have meetings here and see how we can get out the vote in Iowa, here in Ames, and if you know people around the state, just to spread the word and spread the horizons and spread the cessation of political taboos and replace it with candor. I'll be back right after Matt finishes, and we can have a discussion. I thank you very much. Here's Matt Zawisky.
I would say we really need to take stock in this campaign, what Ralph's doing, what a lot of the folks who are volunteering are doing, and especially in a time when a lot of us feel powerless, or that, at least that's what I've been seeing across the country, outside of universities, in everyday people's lives. And we need to remember, I think, the guy we just saw, Ralph, is the ultimate sort of David and Goliath story, especially in a time that reminds us, Ralph sort of reminds us, the campaign reminds us, that we do have the power to put these solutions into play. Just think, in 1965, Ralph, in his early 30s, exposed the dangerous cars, the Corvair, against GM's will. GM was the largest corporation in the world at the time, larger and more profitable than all but 12 countries. And here he is, he exposes what they knew that, as a result, killed thousands of people. And they tried to destroy him. They tried to smear his name. They tried to seduce him with prostitutes. They followed him with detectives. And against all that, he brought them to their knees and was too smart for their antics. And as a result, he brought the CEO before Congress, had him literally apologize in front of the country. And at the time, it was huge, tremendous news. And we need to share that at the very least as we go across the country, and as we hear these two narratives of Obama and McCain, which I think don't even parallel to the work that we're trying to do, and to get other voices out there and really improve our democracy. I was just fortunate to meet Ralph in Buffalo, and just that sliver of the country, he helped us in Love Canal. There was this huge toxic waste dump. He met with housewives trying to defend their families who had houses on top of toxic waste, Just up the street, there was a plutonium deposits in Lewiston Porter next to a high school. And just down the river, there was another toxic dump in West Valley. And he came over the period of about 25 years, a lot of it, most of it on his own dime, and really helped organize, brought his workers to these areas to fight and try to improve the health of these sites. And that's just in one part of the country. So this campaign, we want to hit all corners of the country. There's over 300 million people in our country, half of which don't vote, half of which of the youth don't vote. And it's incredibly important. As I finished school, I've noticed a lot of students and classmates my age, they find it very difficult to become active, giving 10, 15 hours a week that I think we need to give to improve our democracy with all its obstacles. I think we need to think about we'll be faced with huge educational loans, trying to find a job that are being outsourced, this huge debt, which is the most ever, trying to find housing, a place to rent. These are huge issues we're going to inherit, unfortunately, from our predecessors. And Ralph and Matt Gonzalez, our running mate, really represents the analysis, the stamina, and really the solutions that have been implemented across the board, across the environment, to health, to consumer safety, to freedom of information. So this campaign really symbolizes all of that, and has really mobilized thousands of young people. Just here in Iowa, there were folks collected thousands of signatures to get us on the ballot. We're on the ballot in 45 states, more than we were ever on compared to our 2 previous runs. So it's a huge accomplishment, and I want to thank those who collected signatures. Some of them might be here today. And think of Ralph is the 100 most, Time Magazine's 100th most influential Americans in the 20th century. And we have an opportunity to vote for these values, and I think show the country that we want this to happen. And if we don't believe in what we're voting for, I think we're just going to get, and we're going to vote for, what will happen is just things will happen that we don't believe in. So we appreciate all those who've been supporting us, and these rallies are the heartbeat of our campaign and need to take us to the next place. We plan to have 35 full-time offices. We're trying to get across the country, get full-time coordinators in every state we can to bust out for this final month of the campaign. And the 2 ways that the media measures our campaign: 1 is how many state ballots you're on, and 2, how much money you've raised. And just the most one can give to a campaign like this is $4,600, $2,300 in the primary, $2,300 in the general election. And I think we do it in these open forums where there are no quid pro quos. Compare that to Obama and McCain that raised $10, $15 million in a week, and compare that to what they're addressing, how they've really, I don't think even addressed they have not addressed really the tip of the iceberg for what we're going to face, especially with this bailout that a lot of people have questions for. That's $700 billion of our money that's going to these corporations, many of which have just basically stolen through their power in Congress. So we'd like to ask, and a lot of you folks just getting here, given the $5, $10 that we asked, is a stretch. A lot of you can give time. We appeal to those who may be able and willing to give more and may have the means to give more. And I'd like to ask if there's one person here who can help us get the ball rolling in Iowa today and give $1,000 to this campaign here today. And it'll make you feel really good. Is there one person here who can do that? Think about it. It's a lot of money. We understand, but we want to run a serious campaign, and it takes resources to do that. So we'd like to appeal to those who are able and willing, and you can even put it on a credit card and pay it off over time. And we'd like to offer, I think, a great token of appreciation, a 40th anniversary copy of Unsafe at Any Speed, the book that launched the consumer movement, and as a result, it launched Ralph's notoriety, his career, and since then has formed hundreds of organizations from farm to environment to better this country and the world. So is there one person here who can do that much? Just raise your hand and let your conscience guide you. There's nothing more liberating than giving Ralph more money you can afford. I've seen it across the country. One person do that? We're asking $1,000, a token of appreciation. And you can put it on a credit card. Okay. This is sort of a reverse auction we do to help us keep going. So how about a $500? A little easier. And we offer a poster designed by one of our workers here, Nick, right there. It's a beautiful poster we want to get out there. And it's only half as much. Can anyone do $500? We got one in the back? Okay, thank you, sir. Give him a hand. Thank you. Thank you very much. Just keep your hand up back there. Thank you. Is there a second person who can do that much? There's a second person. Just to keep you posted, we're running at 5, 6, 7% in the polls, 6% in a CNN national poll, and that's equivalent to 10 million potential voters. So there's a huge interest out there, and most people, the biggest problem is most people don't know we're even running, given the lack of national exposure in the press. Once they do know, it just opens up a whole new portal of interest, especially given how you saw just before that Obama and McCain are so similar. So that's what we're trying to do: open up new avenues for people who aren't who want something else and who aren't maybe turned on to politics. So we appreciate everything you can do. Anyone else who can do $500 after thinking about it a bit? How about $250? We'll give you an Unreasonable Man. Okay, thank you, man. Appreciate it. Give her a hand. Thank you. Well, who's seen Unreasonable Man, by the way, the documentary? A bunch of people. We'll offer this for that level, and this is the answer to the really the political bigotry and unfairness that we're getting across the country. People asking us, "Why are you running? You're a spoiler." This really gives a real context to what's been happening the last 40 years, and really connects the dots, to people who really question. We get this question all the time: "Why are you running?" We just got it in Des Moines, and this really puts us on the same level, and we want to show it here at the university as well for the final push. So, can anyone else do $250? Okay, how about $100? And we can still get the movie. Anyone do $100? A little easier? Got one in the back? Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Is there a second who can do $100? Just combine with a friend or a family member? Oh, no. He's got Che on his shirt. That's a committed activist. Che Guevara, a young Guevara fan. Is there a second person? Do $100? Okay. I know a lot of you heard about the elephant and the donkey. We've unveiled our symbol, which we're trying to get across the country, which I hope you'll like. It's the buffalo, which is going to be our symbol, and you'll get this for $50. So who here wants to get a great shirt? Who can give $50? this can't we? One here. Okay, thank you, sir. Is there a second? Is there a second who can do 50? Just think about how much, one of our workers put it to us this way: how much you spend on fast food in a month. Maybe for this, one here? Okay, thank you, sir. $50, see? Maybe you can do a fast food fast, for Ralph, and put that in the campaign, and I think it'll make you feel a little lighter. Can anyone else do that much? One your hand? Okay, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is there a fourth? Fourth? How about $25 or $20, and we'll still give you the shirt. It's our final part of the reverse. Who can do that much? $20. Just put your hand up, and we'll get the bucket around. We got a couple here. Okay, give them a hand. Okay, thank you very much. The more we raise, the more we can get Ralph out there. Again, we want to buy some ads or get these offices humming with people, so we can get full-time people in these states that can work with volunteers that we're trying to coordinate. So it's all going to that for the final push. And every dollar we raise, every vote we get is one step closer to these solutions and what we're trying to do here. So we really appreciate it. We're going to pass around buckets. Again, if you want to give privately, you can do that as well. You don't want to upset a spouse or a partner, you can give privately. And keep an eye out on the website. Who's seen the website here, by the way? I'm just curious to see. A great amount of people. So if there's one thing you can do is just get a few people to join the email list. And I think it's just a really fantastic way of communication to break the sort of apathy or the not knowing about what we're about. So think about it that way. Just a couple actions you could do, and we're going to have a volunteer meeting right following this event where you can get more involved as well. Probably in the corner of the room here by Scott, our organizer. So let's keep in touch. I got Ralph back here for some questions, and thank you very much for helping us out here. So thank you very much. And these make fantastic gifts for the final month. Fantastic gifts for family, grandparents, granddaughters. So think about it that way as well. And it goes for a good cause. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. Anybody want to start with, is there a PA system here? Yeah, somebody can start. If you want to announce a meeting or a rally or whatever, just feel free to do so in terms of the time and place. Yes.
Turn the mic on.
Yes. Yes, sir. And thank you all, by the way, for coming and for your generosity. That's the only way we do it. No backroom stuff. Smoke-filled back rooms, cutting deals.
Okay, I'm ready. I've admired you for years, and I did not succumb in 2000 to least worst voting. Voted for you. But I have to say, since 2004, and especially now in 2008, I think least worst voting makes a heck of a lot of sense. And here's why. When I think about the prospect of another right-wing nut in the White House, especially one who doesn't seem to have met a war he didn't like, why should I not vote for Obama, the least worst? It seems to me like the differences are stark enough. I mean, that said, I do agree that the two major parties share more similarities and differences. But one wants to get us out of Iraq. The other one wants to stay for 100 years. One is trying to get health care insurance, however imperfectly. The other doesn't strike me as giving a damn. So what do you tell somebody like me who says that, especially in Iowa, which is a swing state, why I shouldn't succumb to least worst voting?
Because the least worst is no longer good enough for the American people. I mean, there is a flunking grade. there's a flunking grade. If you have a breaking point, you would have, taking all the stands of Obama and McCain and their records in the Senate and so on, you would have a breaking point. And I was like you for 20 years. You know, I went around the country saying, look at Mondale, he's better than Reagan. And it doesn't work. The only ethical way you can be a least worst voter is to make demands on your least worst candidate. Then you can say, you're a tactical voter, but you're pulling Obama. You're saying, withdrawal from Iraq does not mean leaving 50,000 soldiers in the military bases, which is what you and your military advisors are saying. And you pull Obama and say, don't send more soldiers into Afghanistan. That's going to blow sky high if we destabilize Pakistan. It'll make Iraq look small by comparison. You say to Obama, your plan is not going to work because you're leaving in place the health insurance industry with its massive administrative costs and its perverse incentives to deny claims and exclude and deduct in order to make more profit rather than deliver health care. So if you want to do that, but I don't think people who vote least worst and surrender any pull on the least worst candidate are performing at a very high ethical plane. Why? Because they know that Obama is not the cat's meow. They dislike McCain, but they're not all that pleased with Obama. They're making a tactical decision. 24 hours a day, the corporations are pulling on Obama and they're pulling on McCain. And you can see it in the flip-flops. You know, both of them were against offshore drilling. Now they're both for offshore drilling. Obama was against FISA, the revised FISA, snooping without judicial approval. He voted for it. He's always flip-flopping whenever power stands behind him, and he has not got the he's got a very concessionary personality politically. He does not have a brave, courageous personality. So it's up to you, who supports him, to make him better, to give him some backbone. If you want to do that, fine. But in about 38 states, it's slam dunk McCain, Arizona, Texas, slam dunk Obama, New York, California. You can vote your conscience. You know, let's look at these two parties very candidly. They both have the same money in politics corruption. They both have allowed the military-industrial complex to overwhelm our government and our tax dollars and our stability in the world. You know, you saw the movie, McCain, the video. McCain and Obama want to increase the military budget. So if you start saying, they're both like this, they're both like this, they're both like this, they're both like this, they're a little different here, they're a little different here. It's hard to find a big difference, but let's say there are differences. What are the totals? You got the similarities here, which you said are greater than the differences. At what point do we break? Everyone should have a breaking point, because if you don't have a breaking point, you have put a ring in your nose and you've given the least worst candidate the tether. You've got to pull them to make them better. Whatever you do in the voting booths, your business. You've got to pull them in April, May, June, July. And that's what the liberals and progressives have not done with either Hillary Clinton or Obama. They're so freaked out with the Republicans. Yes?
What is your opinion of runoff voting, either instant runoff or some other scheme?
Well, I'm for it. It certainly will strip the two parties of their spoiler excuse. And no one can get elected without getting a majority vote under runoff voting, because you got your first, second, third choice, and if on the first round no one gets a majority, then the second choice kicks in, and third choice until you get a majority. Yes? Yes, sir? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
What policies do we need to support specifically to make sure that the green economy is growing and vibrant in the United States as soon as possible?
Here's where here's where McCain and Obama are really so shallow. They all say the same thing. We need nuclear, we need oil, we need gas, we need coal, we need solar, we need geothermal. It's not that simple. Some forms of energy are a lot better than others. And renewable energy, solar, wind power, geothermal, renewable energy and massive technological energy efficiencies like motor vehicles, lighting, heating, air conditioners, all of which have been ready to go, are far superior to more oil, coal, gas, and nuclear. For environmental reasons, for economic reasons, for posterity reasons, for geopolitical reasons, for community self-reliance, sustainability reasons. And that's what I would start with. I think solar energy is the greatest single solvent for our environmental problems. It's the greatest single solvent. And it's been around for years, right? It's going to be around for 4 billion years. Good forward planning potential. The ancient Persians, Greeks, and East Africans used passive solar architecture. And the Netherlands, wind power in our geography books when we were kids. Solar thermal was used in South Florida in the 1920s before natural gas pipelines came in. Wind power now is coming on fast in this country. There's the main problem blocking renewables is very simple. Renewables will reduce the sales of the oil, gas, coal companies and eventually displace them. The main problem with getting more fuel-efficient cars and heating, air conditioning, is that these improvements reduce the sales of electric companies, oil companies, and so on. That's what it's all about. They've got the lobbies in Washington, and they don't want to be displaced, and they don't want to have their sales reduced. It's not a technical problem. It is a political problem. Because if we started renewability 40, 50 years ago, when President Truman's Materials Policy Commission said that we should go solar, and by 1975, 3/4 of our houses would be solarized, you wouldn't have any technological problems here. It's only because we haven't done much research and development in renewables that they can make some arguments. But the innovation in solar now is really bordering on the spectacular. It's really unleashed now. Very fast-growing solar companies in California, Australia, China, and elsewhere. Yes?
I'm sort of want to go back to the first question. I'm well past the point where I would vote for one of the two large parties, but I want you in particular to tell me why to vote for you as opposed to one of the other large third parties, because I want my vote to reflect a large consensus, well, have a larger voice. So I want to find out which third party is going to have the largest vote total that actually makes a statement. And I'm most inclined toward the Green, but if the Reform Party or the whichever managed to, on election night, has the largest vote, I want to have my vote with them. And added on to that, what cooperation have you had with some of the other large third parties for having a debate, purchasing time together for a debate, anything like that?
We have good cooperation. About a month ago, we had a press conference at the National Press Club in Washington with Libertarian Constitution, Green, and Nader Gonzalez, and the moderator was Ron Paul. And we agreed on 4 areas: wars of aggression, military-industrial complex, that's one; deficit, and financing wars by deficit spending. The civil liberties issues of FISA revised, Patriot Act, unitary presidency, and the government within a government known as the Federal Reserve, and cracking down on corporate crime. Imagine those right-wing parties are coming right around here. And it's quite amazing. We're the leaders in the third. We're number 3 in the polls, and we're likely to get considerably more votes than the others. But we don't badmouth each other. The Green Party has good agenda, but they can't organize. They can't raise any money. They didn't even get matching funds for Cynthia McKinney, which is, if you can't get matching funds, all you need is to raise $5,000 in $250 increments or less in 20 states. That's $100,000. and they couldn't even do that. So she would get matching funds from the federal government. And also, you know, we have a good record, 40 years. We're much more comprehensive in our agenda. Direct democracy, for example, ending corporate personhood. We've had a lot of experience in all this. The Libertarian Party doesn't believe in federal safety and health regulation, which I think is absurd. I mean, you want to go into a pharmacy and not have that drug having pre-market tested? Not to mention cars and all. They've got gaps in their thinking. On the other hand, on civil liberties, they're very good, and on wars, they're very, you know, the military budget, they're very good. And they're coming around opposing subsidies, big time, to corporations. Yes.
Just to announce, we have 10 more minutes for questions. And following, we'll have a meeting with Scott for Get Out the Vote right in the front
Yes.
right corner. It's about 10 more minutes. So
Yeah, those of you who major in political science would like to be there. Yes.
Mr. Nader, my name is Basil Mahaney, and this is...
Could you get a little closer?
Yeah. My name is Basil Mahaney, and this is Carlos Ariza.
Oh,
And
yes.
We're graduate students. I'm up at the University of Minnesota, and he's a graduate student here at Iowa State. And we had a private conversation one time about unionizing graduate students, and one of the things that isn't talked about really is in terms of the exploitation of labor of graduate students and the difficulty of organizing graduate students because of the variation of disciplines. There are differences in wages, and it makes it very, very difficult for graduate students to survive. And while we recognize that we do have the privilege of being in graduate school, there are some conditions in which we have to deal with which are just very much absurd. And a lot of that, you know, many graduate students have to go and take out loans just to meet basic life needs. And if you have any sort of suggestions in which we can go and begin to bridge those disciplinary gaps, especially the social science, hard science gaps, we would very much appreciate any sort of suggestions you have.
Yeah, if I understood your question, I had a little trouble hearing all of it. Well, the longer range issue is really university free tuition, like high school. And that would take care of the problem. And, you know, other countries of far lesser riches than ours have done it. Second, in some schools, graduate students organize. At Yale, they had a really terrific struggle. I don't know whether they won or not, but the graduate student assistants organized into a union because they were being exploited by the university. But I don't think I got the thrust of anything else. Is there anything else you want?
The crux of the question is how do you begin to bridge a lot of those disciplines? I know at the University of Minnesota they've tried to unionize before, but the university effectively comes down on them. In the state of Minnesota, RAs and TAs have to unionize together, which it makes it very, very difficult because in terms of the job demands and the wages, they're very, very different. So you have an array of different interests and needs, and it's very hard to bring them all together, if that makes sense.
What does RA stand for?
Research assistant versus a teaching
assistant.
Yes.
Right. Well, you know, you're way ahead of me on this. All I can recommend is you contact people in some other universities who have experienced this and who have some sort of success in it. Right now, I can't recall out east. There are some universities actually where the teaching assistants and research assistants have had some success. But you're right; they rarely get together. They very rarely get together. And as you say, there's more strength together. The worst part is that a lot of research priorities are determined by the corporate connection with the university, grants, moonlighting by professors. And a lot of times graduate students see that they can cater to this, and even though that wouldn't be their choice of research, when they're asked by the professor to join this project, which is funded by Monsanto or some computer company, they find it hard to say no in terms of their own career. To be continued, Basil. Okay. Thank you.
Ralph, I have the comment that I think the United States is undoubtedly the worst exploitive military industrial power in history. And I'm ashamed of our nation for being that way. But how do we educate Americans to recognize the dangers of this militarism, selling their souls also to the fear of terrorism and selfish materialism? How do we do that?
Well, I mean, that's why I'm traveling in 50 states and campaigning. Unlike a corporation, I can't be in 1,000 places at once. I wish I could. That's what the civic movements are about, the peace movements, the anti-war movements. Some of them have big websites, and they're getting to more people. But if they're not represented inside the political arena, if they're not represented inside the electoral arena by candidates, they can only go so far. Because to make the changes you're implying, they've got to be made by government. And if they're going to be made by government, there has to be elected representatives and candidates and parties taking these humanitarian and peace advocacy proposals into those arenas. And that's what has not been happening. The Democrats don't take it in, the Republicans don't take it in, and the small parties have to spend so much time of money just to get on the ballot before all those deadlines in June, July, and August. So we're trying to open the path here, and the more votes we get, the more broader the path becomes. The more votes you give to Nader Gonzalez, the more those peace groups in Washington will have influence, because that's the only thing they understand. More votes moving away from the two parties and into another column that has a record of steadfastness on these issues. Now, in a less organized way, there's nothing stopping people from taking a few minutes off now and then and supporting these peace groups with money, with volunteer hours, so they become bigger and deeper and more influential, or even just contacting their member of Congress. I know that tends to be cliche-ish, but members of Congress tabulate the kind of opinion that's coming in from their districts. They tabulate the emails, the letters, the phones, and if suddenly there's a consistent surge followed by an invitation from back home by the citizens for the senators and representatives to have a meeting in a public auditorium open to the press, that really gets their attention. And so see how it keeps building up. If you get enough citizen time to create enough citizen power to get the senator representatives to agree to your public auditorium meeting, that's a big step forward. They come back here and they have their own meetings and their own, way of controlling them. But when the citizens generate the meetings, the senator and representative said, something's happening here. There's growing power here. I can't say no. They're going to fill an auditorium with 400 people. The press is going to be there. I got to pay attention. Now, nobody can stop people from doing that. So that's hundreds and thousands of small conversations with your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers, whatever is on your email list to get it done. Most people don't do that because they don't think other people are going to do it. So why waste their time? It's like, spitting in the wind. My approach is you do what you should do and worry about other people doing it. Don't say, I'm not going to do it unless 1 million people do it because it's going to take 1 million people to make any change. You just do what you should do and encourage other people to do it. Otherwise, you won't do anything. Because all 1 million people will be looking at each other's shoulders and say, I'm not going to do anything unless you do something. Somebody has to get the ball rolling. Yes. Is somebody over there?
Yes, sir. First of all, I want to say thank you for your steadfastness over the years. And I want to say that you have my vote, and it's not because of your Ralph Nader, but it's because of what you say. It's because you have answers. You know what you're talking about very deeply and many layers down into the complexities of the belly of the beast. And I just the reason I'm standing up here is I wanted to say to all of my fellow Iowans is that that's the kind of person that we should have sitting in the White House, is not a politician, not somebody that is really good at making you feel like you voted for the right person or the right party or whatever, but that you are sure that you have an administrator sitting in the White House who knows the issues, who knows that his job is a tireless one, that his job is a serious and somber job, because all of our lives hang in the balance. And I think at the very least, you should ask yourself, and I don't mean to start a cliche, but what would Ralph do? And when you're asking yourself, what should I do? Well, what would Ralph do? Here he is tirelessly going from state to state with very little sleep, endlessly pounding away at this campaign, and I think that he deserves a round of applause for that. But as well, we should ask ourselves, what would Ralph do? Okay, well, he would go on this long campaign. Well, I can't do that. Okay, then half that. And if you can't do that, then have that. And if you can't do that, then have that. It's like a cookie. You break it in half. You always have a crumb. At least do the crumb. I sent his website to 143 people on my email list. And, of course, I was thinking, well, somebody's going to get mad at me because I'm abusing the political, you don't argue politics, email, whatever. And what I said to myself was, we're in such bad shape in this country that I'll apologize to all 143 people for sending. But I know that what we need to do is grassroots, get the word out. You've got to share it with those people that are closest to you and encourage them to share it to those who are closest to them. Donate what you can. And remember, you're going to end up paying it to the government anyway, 100 times over. So the election is probably a gamble. If you gamble on the right party, whether it be red or the blue, no matter who it gets elected, we're going to lose. So if you're going to gamble, at least gamble on the man who's qualified to sit in the White House.
Thank you. Well, it's very, very kind of you. And listening to you provoked another comment of mine, which is, if you have least worst voters who don't put demands on their least worst candidate, say Obama, and pull them, you're just encouraging exclusion in the future. You're encouraging the debate commission, which is controlled by the two parties, say, hey, you know, we got all these least worst voters. One is least worst Republican, the other is least worst Democrat. That really pays off to exclude Nader and others that national polls want on the debate stage with you. So there's a lot of consideration when you're a least worst voter without making demands. You're just a complicity, and every 4 years both parties are going to get worse. Look at the last 25 years. The liberal Republicans in the 70s would be considered radical Democrats today. It just keeps getting worse and worse. You know, if I was on that stage for the 3 debates, which is the only way you can reach tens of millions of people if you're not a billionaire, we'd have a 3-way race. When Perot got on, he shot up in the polls, and that's why they never let him on in 96 after he got 19 million votes in 92. They excluded this man who got 19 million votes in the prior election and got away with it. And predictably, he went down in the polls. That's how important those debates are. Now, we shouldn't have a society that puts all our eggs in these 3 so-called debates. They're really parallel interviews. But in the future, we should have national coalitions of labor, citizen, neighborhood, religious, veteran, consumer, environmental groups, all get together and summon the presidential candidates to a whole string of real debates from Boston to San Diego. That's the way to do it. That's the way to take control from the presidential candidates. You have to take control of the agenda and the dynamics. And is there anybody that can stop all these groups from doing it? Of course not. Again, it's the key question that goes to civic motivation. Ask yourself, what is it you can do to help turn this country around that no one can stop you from doing? Because it doesn't cost a lot of money to show up, for example. Yes. Yeah, okay.
Hello, Mr. Nader. I'd just like to say thank you for coming to speak today. We don't often get a lot of major candidates at this point in the year. Thank you for all your great service to this country over the last several decades. My question is just about energy. You touched a little bit ago on your solar energy policy, and your campaign literature talks about your opposition to nuclear energy. And I was just curious if you see any potential for an overhaul of the transportation, disposal, creation of new nuclear energy plants, anything along that. I'm just curious what you have to say.
We don't need it. It's unneeded, unnecessary, unsafe, uneconomic, and a national security nightmare in terms of spent fuel rod pools next to nuclear plants. What a target. And transporting radioactive waste to some place that they haven't yet determined to be that geologically secure. Yucca Mountain doesn't quite cut it. So why mess with it? Why have uranium mines, uranium miners exposed, uranium tailings outside the mines, then you go and you fabricate the steel rods, and then you put them together with other fabrications, and you build a big nuclear plant with huge containment, and you got to find a place for deadly radioactive waste for 200,000 years, and you have to have evacuation plans in case of a nuclear accident, and you don't get adequate insurance because the private insurance companies won't insure you, and every nuclear plant has to be guaranteed 100% by the U.S. government according to the nuclear industry itself, because private finance thinks it's too risky to loan money for nuclear plants without 100% guarantee. And what is this all for? To boil water. To boil water and produce steam. We've got many, many better ways. Let's start with the sun. I wish the sun could talk to the earth. Can you imagine the lecture that the sun would give to the earth? And so we have good biomass, not corn ethanol. We have solar thermal. Passive solar architecture is hardly ever talked about, although they call it green buildings, as you know. I like to call it passive solar architecture because it keeps putting the word solar. And we have solar photovoltaic dropping in price quite rapidly. As the price of oil and gas go up, it makes it even more feasible to have solar. And now the engineers are developing geothermal under almost any building in America. I mean, usually people think of geothermal as these really deep source, sort of Old Faithful, in Yellowstone National Park. But now they've got they've got these ways that they can still expensive, but everything's expensive at the beginning. Do you know what a car cost in 1900? It cost $10,000 in $1,900. You imagine what it would cost? But when you had mass production, etc., it went down. Years ago, Barry Commoner, the great environmentalist, presented a detailed plan to the Pentagon and said, look, if you buy solar, you're going to create economies of scale in a civilian marketplace. And why should they buy solar? Well, the Navy started buying solar photovoltaics in remote locations, not just for environmental reasons, but for economic reasons. You don't have to refuel. And if the Pentagon did that, given the money it spends, it could have accelerated the solar age. So I always answer questions like yours, which are earnest questions, is why bother when we have these other alternatives? Just think of the evacuation plant. What kind of energy requires a massive, detailed evacuation plant than nuclear power? I suppose a liquefied natural gas tanker coming into a port. But it was the Atomic Energy Commission itself, the big promoter of nuclear power, in 1957, said a Class 9 meltdown in a 1,000-megawatt nuclear plant would contaminate an area the size of Pennsylvania. Do we want to take the chance like that? Look at Chernobyl. You got villages around Chernobyl completely evacuated, with the doors swinging in the wind and empty houses. I just urge you to get a hold of Amory Lovin's studies on this. He's a physicist. He doesn't even talk about the danger of nuclear power. He just rips it apart on an economic basis. He's a consultant to utility companies, so he doesn't read Karl Marx on his lunch break. Let's put it that way. Well, we do have to go on to your favorite neighbor state, Nebraska, and I hope that those of you who are here who really are serious about helping us get out the vote, will have a meeting here. Yes, thank you again. Remember, votenator.org. Just spread the website to your friends.